The back window of Celia Barrow's Apothecary had a broken latch she'd been meaning to fix since March, and at 2:30 on a Tuesday morning in September, a man fell through it. She heard the crash from the room above, the narrow bed she had shared with Nathan for 6 years before the fever took him, and she did not scream. She had lived alone above a shop in Liverpool's harbour quarter for 14 months. She had heard crashes before. She took the lamp from the bedside table, lit it, and went down the stair in her nightgown with the brass pestle from the grinding bench held in her right hand. The man was on the storeroom floor between the camphor crates and the wall of tincture bottles. He had pulled half the window frame with him on the way in. He lay on his side with one arm thrown across the boards and his breathing coming in the shallow, laboured draw she recognised before she even set the lamp down. Belladonna. And under it, something else, something thin and astringent that caught at the back of her throat when she knelt beside him. She pressed 2 fingers to the pulse at his neck. It was there, barely. Finn was already on the storeroom stairs. Finn always woke when she did, though she could never say how. The boy was 11 and fully mute, and slept like the dead, except when something in the shop changed. He stood at the top of the stairs with his bare feet, and his eyes wide, and his small chalk slate clutched against his chest. She looked up at him. She said, "He's been poisoned. I need the tincture of charcoal from the 3rd shelf and the emetic from the blue bottle beside it. Can you do that?" Finn could always do that. He had been her delivery runner for 2 years and her shadow for 14 months, and he knew every shelf in the dispensary by touch. He was down the stairs and back before she had the man rolled onto his back, and she got the emetic past his lips by force of will and the pressure of her thumb behind his jaw, and she got the charcoal after. By the time the grey came up against the harbour window, he was breathing steadily enough that she could look at him clearly for the first time. He was perhaps 30. The clothes were fine. Dark wool coat, not a merchant's coat, the kind that cost more than she earned in a month, but the coat was ruined, soaked through at the shoulder with something that was not rain. A cut, she decided. Not deep, but fresh. Someone had put a knife in him before the poison had taken hold, or after it, or both. His signet ring was gone. The white mark of it was still on his right hand's 4th finger, but there was a chain at his throat, and from the chain hung a small oval miniature. She did not open it. She covered him to the chin with the dispensary blanket, and sat back on her heels and looked at him and waited. He woke at noon. He opened his eyes and looked at the low ceiling of her storeroom, and then at the tincture bottles ranked on the shelves above him, and then at her, where she sat at the dispensing table, with a ledger open that she had not been reading. His eyes were dark, brown, not grey, and entirely, startlingly clear for a man who had been half dead 6 hours earlier. He said, "Where am I?" She said, "An apothecary on Quay Street, Liverpool. You came through my back window at 2:30 this morning." He looked at the patched window frame. He said, "I broke it." She said, "The latch was already broken. You broke the frame." She paused. "You were poisoned, belladonna, and I think something else beneath it that I haven't fully placed yet. I got most of it out of you. The cut on your shoulder needed 3 stitches. You're welcome." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "I am in your debt." She said, "You can start by telling me your name." He looked at her steadily and said, "Sinclair, Arthur Sinclair." She set down her pen. She said, "Is that the name you'll give when someone comes looking?" He did not answer. She said, "I am Celia Barrow. My late husband was Nathan Barrow, who kept this dispensary for 11 years before he died. I've kept it for the 14 months since. I know every apothecary's ledger in this harbour district, and every family name attached to a shipping concern in the county. And I know what a man looks like when he's given the wrong name in a woman's storeroom. What is your name?" He looked at her for a long moment. He said, Rowan Ashby." She said nothing yet, but she recognised the name. The Ashby shipping concern was the largest private fleet in the Mersey Basin, and the previous Viscount Ashby, the one who had died 2 winters ago in what the inquest had called a riding accident at the Cheshire estate, had been in every Liverpool paper for a week. She said, "Viscount Ashby." He said, "Yes." She nodded once. She said, "Then someone tried to kill you last night." He said, "Yes." She said, "And they've tried before." He was quiet for just a beat too long. She had her answer. Finn appeared at the doorway with a cup of willow bark tea and a piece of bread on a plate, and set them beside the blanket with the careful precision of a child who had decided, without being asked, that the man on the dispensary floor was someone who needed feeding. He looked at Rowan with the measuring look he gave all new things, not unfriendly, simply thorough, and then he took his chalk slate from under his arm and wrote on it in his neat, small hand and held it out. Rowan read it. His expression shifted. He said, "No, I won't." Finn considered this. He wrote again. Rowan read. He said quietly, "I don't know yet." And then, after a pause, "What's your name?" Finn pointed to Celia. She said, "He doesn't speak. He has a name, but he prefers I not give it to strangers. He'll tell you himself if he decides you're not one." Rowan looked at the boy for a moment. He said, "Fair enough." Finn picked up the bread plate and set it closer to Rowan's hand. It was, Celia knew, the highest compliment the boy gave. He told her that afternoon, not all of it, but enough. His cousin Piers had been the Viscount before him. Piers had died in November of 1831, 2 years and 10 months ago, at the Ashby estate in Cheshire. A fall from a horse in the early morning, the horse found grazing without a rider, Piers found at the base of the stone fence at the bottom of the south field. The inquest had returned accidental death. Rowan had been in Edinburgh at the time, and he had come home to a house already sealed and a solicitor already reading the will, and a woman called Lady Vivian Stoke, who had been Piers' wife for 3 years, already wearing mourning that fit her rather too well to have been sown in grief. He had said nothing then. He had thought, as men sometimes did when the alternative was too large to face, that the verdict had been correct, and that his unease was the unease of a man who had always watched his cousin too closely. He had come back to Liverpool in June. He had begun, quietly, to look at the estate accounts. 3 weeks ago, someone had loosened the wheel pin on his curricle on the road south from the harbour office. He had walked away from it with a sprained wrist. Last week, a letter had arrived, unsigned, containing a single line. "You are asking the wrong questions. Stop." He had not stopped, and last night, at the Merchants' Club dinner in Water Street, someone had put something in his port. He did not know who had done it. He thought he knew who had paid for it. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "The poison last night. The belladonna was the main dose. That was meant to put you under quickly. But there was something under it. I've been trying to place the smell since this morning." She turned to the dispensary shelf and took down a small brown bottle. She held it to the lamp. "Oil of hemlock, I think. A very small addition. Not enough to kill on its own, but combined with the belladonna, and with alcohol in the system. It would look, if no one looked carefully, like a man who drank too much at dinner and did not wake up." He was still, he said. "You know that from the smell." She said, "I know it because Nathan and I catalogued every compound interaction in this dispensary for 6 years, and because hemlock has a smell like damp parsley that doesn't fully disappear even in a blend. Yes, from the smell." She set the bottle down. Whoever mixed this knew their compounds. This was not an amateur's work. This was someone with access to a dispensary or a very well-stocked household medicine chest. He looked at her. He said, "Lady Vivian keeps a medicine chest." She said, "Tell me about it." Finn was sick on the 3rd night. It came on without warning, the way fevers always did. Celia put her hand to his forehead at the after-supper hour and felt the heat, and went very still inside in the way that had no name, except the name of fear that had nothing to do with reason. She had no children. She had not expected to love a mute orphan boy who delivered medicines and slept on a cot behind the camphor crates. She had not asked to. He had simply stayed, the way certain things stayed when there was nowhere better to go, and now he was hot to the touch, and she did not allow herself to think the word fever without the word Nathan following it. Rowan was sitting up against the wall with the dispensary ledger in his hands, which she had given him to keep him still. He saw her face when she came back from behind the camphor crates. He set the ledger down. He said, "The boy." She said, "Yes." He said, "Bring him here." She looked at him. He was 5 days out from the poisoning, and his colour was still not fully right. He said, "I won't give it to him. What I had was in my port glass, not in my lungs. Bring him here and let him be warm. Your cot is on the stone floor, and the wall beside the shelves holds the heat from the lamp all night." He was right about the wall. She gathered Finn up in his blanket and settled him beside Rowan, and she went down to the hearth to set water for the elderflower tea. And when she came back up, Rowan had turned so that his back was between the boy and the draught from the broken window frame, and he had his hand on the back of Finn's neck, and he was speaking to him, low and even, his mouth close enough that the shape of the words would travel, about a harbour he had seen in Halifax when he was 20, where the ice came in at dusk in sheets like blown glass, and where the fishermen's dogs slept on the boat decks and barked at seagulls in their sleep. Finn did not wake, but his breathing evened. Celia sat on the dispensing stool and did not look away. She wrung the cloth every half hour until the fever broke at dawn. At the grey hour, with Finn sleeping quietly and Rowan still awake across the dispensary bed, he looked at her over the lamp and said, "I had a cousin, not Piers, younger Henry." She waited. He said, "Henry died at 19, in same winter as our father. I was 22, and I had just come back from Edinburgh, and the estate was in 3 kinds of trouble, and I was the only one left to sort it. I sorted it. I did not sit with Henry the way I should have. I was in the office when he died." He looked at his own hand on the back of Finn's neck. "I have not been in the room when anyone needed it since then." She said, "You're in the room now." He did not answer, but he did not look away from her, and after a moment the silence between them had a different weight, the weight of something said rather than something left unsaid. She set the advertisement on the 4th morning. She wrote it at the dispensing table before dawn and took it herself to the Liverpool Chronicle office on Castle Street when it opened at 7. The notice read simply, "Sought by the dispensary at Barrow & Sons, Quay Street. Any soul who saw a man in a dark wool coat between Water Street and the Quay between 10 o'clock and midnight on the evening of the 14th of September is asked to send word to the above address. A fee of 2 shillings for a sworn account." She did not use Rowan's name, she used the address. The first answer came that evening. It came in the shape of a harbour watchman named Dobbs, 60 years in service at the Mersey dock, who had been on his night round on the 14th, and who had seen a private carriage with Stoke livery parked at the service lane behind the Merchants' Club between 11 and midnight. 2 men, he said. One of them had carried a bundle to the carriage that had not been there when the carriage arrived. He sat on the dispensing stool and gave his account, and Celia wrote it down and he signed it, and she gave him his 2 shillings, and he went back to his round. She took the page upstairs and laid it on the blanket and said only, 1. Rowan read it. He said, "Stoke livery." She said, "Yes." He shut his eyes for a moment. He said, "She paid for the carriage." She said, "Yes, and I think she paid for the compound." He opened his eyes. He said, "Then she paid for Piers." The second answer came on the 6th day. It came from a woman named Sybil Renton, 52, who had been housekeeper at the Stoke townhouse on Rodney Street until 18 months ago. When Lady Vivian had dismissed her without explanation, she had read the notice in the Chronicle at her sister's kitchen table in Everton, and walked to the dispensary on a Monday morning and asked for Mrs. Barrow. Celia brought her upstairs. Mrs. Renton stood in the doorway of the dispensary room, looked at Rowan on the bed, and put her hand to her collar. She said, "Lord have mercy, it's the Viscount." Rowan said, "Mrs. Renton." She said, "My lord." She sat down without being asked, the way a woman sits when her legs have made the decision before she has. She said it was October of last year. I went into her ladyship's dressing room to lay the morning fire, and I saw a parcel on the escritoire. She wasn't in the room. The parcel was open. Inside was a wrapped paper packet, the kind the apothecaries seal, and the label on it had been cut away, but the smell came through the paper. She folded her hands in her lap. "I know the smell of belladonna. I kept the medicines for the Stoke household for 11 years. 2 days later she dismissed me, a month's wages, and told me the household was reducing." She looked at Celia. "I kept quiet because I had nowhere to go and nothing to prove. I have come now because your notice asked the question, and I would rather speak it than carry it. She produced from the pocket of her coat the cutaway label. She had kept it. She did not know why, she said, only that it seemed the kind of thing one kept. The label read, Compound B for external application only, T. Prawl Dispensary, Bold Street. Celia said, Compound B is not for external application. There is no legitimate Compound B. It's a ledger code some houses use for restricted preparations. She looked at the label. Thomas Prall's dispensary on Bold Street closed 14 months ago. He lost his licence. She looked at Rowan. He said 2. On the 7th day, Finn left a note on the dispensing table. He had gone out before she was fully awake, and she found the note when she came downstairs. It said in his small, careful hand, Gone to Bold Street. Back before noon. He was back before 10. He had found, in the lodging above the shuttered dispensary on Bold Street, a man named Crawley who had been Thomas Prall's compounding assistant for 6 years, and who had been given, he told Finn, and then Celia on Finn's insistence, the sum of £8 on a bank draft in Lady Vivian Stokes' handwriting, to mix and deliver a specific preparation to the Stoke townhouse in the October of last year, and again 2 weeks ago, and to say, if anyone asked, that the preparation was a sleeping draught for her ladyship's nerves. He was a small man with red-rimmed eyes, and the tremor of a person who had been frightened for a very long time. He came to the dispensary on Finn's arm, and sat on the stool and gave his account, and Celia wrote it down, and he wept a little at the end of it. He signed his name. He said, I knew it wasn't for nerves. I knew in October. I should have come forward then. Celia said, You've come forward now. She took the account upstairs. She said 3. Rowan had been sitting up. He looked at her. He said, And the man Dobbs saw, the one carrying something to the carriage. She said, Finn is working on it. He looked at the stairway where Finn had disappeared. He said, He's 11. She said, He is, and he knows every delivery route between the Quay and Rodney Street, and he can go places that a grown man asking questions cannot. He has been doing this work for me for 2 years, and he is very good at it. Rowan was quiet. He said, You trust him? She said, Completely. He looked at her. He said, As you trust the work? She said, As I trust the work. There was a beat of silence. He said, What was Nathan like? She had not expected the question. She said, He was kind. He was honest. He loved the dispensary more than he loved almost anything else, and I came into his life 3 years after the dispensary did, and I always knew the order of things. He was good to me. He did not love me the way I had once thought love worked. She looked at the tincture shelf. I have been useful to this shop all my life. I prefer useful to other things. He said, Useful is not a small word. She said, No, it is not. He did not say anything else. But he looked at her the way a man looks at something he is trying to commit to memory, and she noted it and set it aside and went back down to the dispensing room. The 4th account came on the 9th day. It came in the shape of the carriage driver, a man named Bracy, who had been Lady Vivian's hired coachman for the past year, who had driven the carriage to Water Street on the night of the 14th, and driven it back to Rodney Street with a man insensible in the cab, and who had not known, he said, with the look of a man who had been saying this to himself for 9 days, that the man was the Viscount. He had come because Finn had left a copy of the Chronicle notice under his lodging door in Mount Pleasant, and had stood in the street below his window and held up a sign that said, She will blame you when they come for her. Come now. He came, he gave his account, he signed it. Celia took the page upstairs. She said, 4. Rowan said, Is that the chain? She said, Almost. She looked at the 4 signed accounts on the blanket. Dobbs places the Stoke carriage. Mrs. Renton places the compound at the Stoke household. Crawley made the compound on Vivian's commission. Bracy drove you to the water and back. And Vivian's bank draft is on Crawley's account. She paused. For Piers, we need the Cheshire estate. You said the saddle had been tampered with. He said, The head groom thought the strap had been cut. He said so at the inquest. He was overruled. She said, Is the head groom still at the estate? He said, His name is Oakes. He's been there 30 years. She said, Write to him tonight. Ask him to come to Liverpool. He said, He's 67. She said, Ask him. The letter went out with the morning post. Oakes arrived on the Friday, having taken the mail coach from Chester and walked the last quarter-mile from the coaching inn with a stick and a satchel. He sat in Celia's dispensary chair and looked at Rowan for a long moment. Then he said, "I kept the strap, my lord. I cut it free after the inquest, and I kept it because no one asked for it, and I did not know who to give it to." He reached into his satchel and laid it on the dispensing table. The cut was clean. Not a wear cut, not a stress break, a straight, deliberate cut 3/4 of the way through the leather, deep enough to fail under weight, but not so deep it would be noticed in a morning check. Celia looked at it and said 5. The men came that same night. Finn saw them first from the upstairs window, 2 figures in dark coats at the alley gate, looking up at the loft light. He came down without a sound and crossed to where Celia was filling the kettle at the hearth and put both hands on her apron and pointed toward the window. She crossed to the glass. She looked. She turned and pinched out the lamp and took Finn by the hand to the narrow space behind the camphor crates, the same space he had slept in for 2 years, and pressed a finger to her own mouth, which he did not need to be told. Rowan was already on his feet. He had heard the footsteps in the alley the same moment she had. He crossed to the dispensary door in the dark without a sound and stood just inside it. The 2 men did not knock. They tried the front door first, then the back shutter, then walked the length of the alley once. They stood in the courtyard for a long time. Then one of them said something low to the other, and they went. Celia counted 200 before she moved. Then she went to the camphor crates and lifted Finn out and held him against her shoulder. He was too old for this, properly, but he was not too heavy, and she did not put him down for a long time. Rowan stood across the room in the dark. She could not see his face. She could see that his hands were still at his sides. After a moment he said, very quietly, "She knows you have the chain." She said, "She has known since Tuesday." He said, "We have to go to the magistrate before she moves again." She said, "Friday morning. I'll set the notice in the Chronicle tonight." He said, "And one other thing." She waited. He said, "I am going tomorrow morning to speak to her ladyship's solicitor. I want it on record from tonight that the chain of evidence exists and that it is held at this address. The solicitor can be trusted. He was my father's man before he was the estate's." He paused. "And I am going to ask you something, and I am asking it in the wrong room on the wrong night, and I know that, and I am asking it anyway because I have until Friday morning, and I don't have a better way." She waited again. He said, "The magistrate's office will not give full weight to your accounts. Her solicitor will stand up in the first 10 minutes and say tradesperson, no standing, and he will be right that the law allows him to say it. There is one way I can stop that." He looked at her in the darkness of the dispensary. "The Ashby name gives standing to anyone who carries it. If you carry it into that room, no solicitor touches you or the chain." He stopped. "And I want Finn's name on the Ashby Parish Register before we walk through that door. He has no record anywhere. If she decides to reach for him, he has nothing to stand behind. I cannot put his name on the register without putting yours there first." Celia looked at him. He said, "I am not asking it for love. I am saying that plainly because I think you deserve plain things. I am asking it because you built the chain, and I will not walk into that room and let someone dismantle it in the first 10 minutes because of what you earn and where your shop is. And I am asking it because I am afraid, and the only thing I have that is mine to give is a name and a title and whatever weight they carry." He stopped. He said, "I will understand if the answer is no." She looked at him for a long while. She looked at the cut on his cheek where he'd come through the window frame. She thought about Nathan, who had been kind and honest, and had loved the dispensary first, and about how she had learned the order of things and decided the ordering was enough. She thought about how she had been wrong, not about Nathan, but about the order being fixed and unchangeable, and the only order there was. She thought about a man sitting up all night, with his back between a sick boy and the wall. She said, "Yes." He let his breath go. He said, "Thank you." She said, "Go and put a clean collar on. Finn will need his shoes tied. He always does them wrong on the left. We leave at 7:30. They were married in the magistrate's anteroom at 8:20 in the morning. The clerk of the court kept a special licence in his desk drawer and read the words without ceremony and meant them. Finn stood at Celia's left hand in the second-best shirt and the correctly tied shoes and held her thumb in his fist and watched the clerk's mouth with the focused attention he gave to all spoken things, reading each word off the shape of the man's lips. The courtroom was full. The Chronicle notice had run at 6 that morning, and half of Liverpool had come to see if it was true. Lady Vivienne Stoke was in the gallery in dark grey silk with a black ribbon at her throat. She had come expecting to hear that the Viscount's body had been found in the river. She looked at the magistrate's bench when she entered, and did not look at the front row. She saw Rowan when the magistrate named the matter. Her face did not change. It was very practised at not changing, but her right hand on the gallery rail closed into a fist and did not open again. Dobbs went first, then Mrs. Renton, then Crawley, who wept a little at the end of his account, then Bracey, who kept his eyes on the floor, then Oakes, who laid the saddle strap on the magistrate's table, and stood very straight while it was examined. Then Rowan. He gave his name and his title and the events of the 14th of September in his quiet, even voice. He named the Merchants' Club and the Port Glass and the broken Apothecary window on Quay Street. He named the 5 accounts. He named his cousin Piers in the South Field in November of 1831. He named the head groom's testimony that had been set aside at the inquest. He named his wife. He named her by the name on the register signed at 8:20 that morning. Celia Ashby, Viscountess Ashby, Apothecary of Quay Street, Liverpool. Lady Vivienne's solicitor rose. He said that the evidence had been gathered by a tradesperson of no standing, assembled for monetary compensation, and that the court ought not to admit testimony collected in this manner by a woman in trade. The magistrate looked at Celia. He said, "Mrs. Ashby, what do you say?" Celia stood. She did not have notes. She had composed it at the dispensing table at 4 in the morning while the kettle boiled, and she had set it in her head the way she set compounds, clean and exact and in the right order. She looked across the courtroom at Lady Vivienne in the grey silk. She said, "I kept a dispensary on Quay Street for 11 years with my husband and 14 months without him. I know what belladonna smells like in a blended compound, and I know what hemlock smells under it, and I know the difference between a worn saddle strap and a cut one. I sent a notice to the newspaper and 2 shillings to anyone who saw what I could not see. 5 people answered, 'You are here because they did.' She sat down. Lady Vivienne did not look at her. Lady Vivienne's solicitor sat down. The magistrate ruled the testimony admitted. He named the charges: the wilful murder of Piers Ashby, the 3rd Viscount Ashby, in November of 1831, the attempted wilful murder of Rowan Ashby, the 4th Viscount Ashby, on the 14th of September 1833, and the corruption of 2 hired persons in connection with the same. The constable went up the gallery stairs. Lady Vivienne did not resist. She looked at Rowan for a long second, not at Celia, never at Celia, and Celia understood that, when you had miscalculated this badly, you did not look at the person who had caught you. Then the constable's hand was on her arm, and she went through the gallery door, and she did not appear in any room Celia was in again. Rowan came back to the dispensary that evening. He came in through the front door, which Celia had unlocked for the first time in 11 days, and he came up the stair and stood at the top and looked at her at the dispensing table, and at Finn already asleep on his cot with the chalk slate on his chest. He said, "The solicitor is filing the full transfer of the estate tonight. The case goes to the assizes in October." She said, "Good." He was quiet. He said, "Celia." She looked at him. He said, "I said in the anteroom that I was not asking it for love. I said that because it was true, and because I thought honesty was what the moment required." He crossed the room and stood at the other side of the dispensing table and looked at her directly. "I want you to know that what I said was true for the anteroom and is not true for now. I don't know yet what the right word is for what it is now. I know that you sat up with me for 4 nights, and that you sent a boy of 11 to Bold Street on my behalf, and that you stood in a courtroom in front of a hostile solicitor and said 7 sentences that finished it. And I know that you have a dispensary with a window that needs a proper frame, and a boy who needs his shoes tied correctly, and a ledger that is 3 weeks behind because of me." He paused. "I am not asking anything else tonight. I am saying that whatever word it is present and not going away, and when you are ready to hear it named, I will name it." She looked at him. She looked at his hands on the dispensing table, which were still and open, the way hands were when a person was being careful not to reach. She said, "The back window needs a proper latch and the frame needs replacing." He said, "I know a carpenter in Water Street." She said, "Finn's school fees are due in November." He said, "I know." She said, "And the ledger is 4 weeks behind, not 3. He said, "I'll sit with the ledger tomorrow if you tell me where the entries go." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she put her hand on the dispensing table, palm up, between the inkstand and the ledger. She did not reach toward him. She left it there. He looked at it. He put his hand over hers, and his fingers closed, and that was the whole of the thing in the lamplight above the Apothecary on Quay Street. Finn, on his cot, did not open his eyes, but one corner of his mouth moved very slightly, and he turned his face against the blanket and was still. 12 months passed. In the October of 1834, the dispensary on Quay Street had a new sign above the door, Barrow and Ashby, Est 1817. The Barrow name was Nathan's, and Celia had kept it because Nathan had built the dispensary, and the dispensary was true, and the Ashby name was new, and hers and also true, and there was room on the sign for both. Finn Ashby, the name entered in the parish register in October of the previous year, the first official record of a boy who had had no record before, was in his 2nd year at the day school on Renshaw Street, and was reading, his teacher said, 2 years above his class. He communicated with the teacher by chalk slate, and the teacher had learned to read his handwriting the way she had learned to read any other students. He came to the dispensary every afternoon and did the delivery round before supper. Lady Vivian Stoke had been tried at the autumn assizes, convicted on all charges, and sentenced to transportation for life. She had sailed from Liverpool in January, bound for Van Diemen's Land, and had written no letters. Oakes had been given the position of estate manager at the Cheshire property at Rowan's request, and occupied it with the same steadiness he had occupied every other position in his 67 years. Dobbs had been commended by the Harbour Authority for his night record-keeping and had asked for, and received, a transfer to the day watch on account of his knees. Mrs. Renton kept house for her sister in Everton and sent a card at Christmas. Crawley had given his full account at the assizes and been discharged. He had found work at a dispensary in Manchester and sent Celia a note of thanks that she had put in the ledger drawer. Nathan Barrow's grave at St. Nicholas's had a new headstone. Celia had ordered it in the spring. It read, "Nathan Barrow, Apothecary, 1789 to 1832, faithful in his work and honest in all things." She had not said beloved husband. That would have been a smaller truth than the one he deserved. He had been her teacher and her partner and her friend, and she had learned from him everything that had mattered. In the 11 days it had taken her to save a man she had never met. The headstone said what was true, and the dispensary sign said the rest. On a Thursday morning in October, Celia was at the compounding bench with the lamp lit and the ledger open when Rowan came downstairs, and set a cup of tea at the edge of the bench without interrupting her count, and stood beside her and read the morning's entries over her shoulder. He said, "The camphor order is wrong." She said, "I know, I'm fixing it." He said, "The emetic is low." She said, "I've ordered it." He said, "You have ink on your wrist again." She looked at her wrist. She did, she said. "I always have ink on my wrist." He did not say anything else. He picked up the ledger and sat down on the dispensing stool and began adding the columns she had left mid-count, the way he did every morning now that she had shown him where the entries went. Outside on Quay Street, Finn was doing the delivery round, the canvas satchel over his shoulder, his shoes correctly tied, because Celia had insisted on the knot twice weekly until it held. The October fog was off the Mersey, and the light came in low and gold through the dispensary window, across the tincture bottles on their shelves, across the new latch on the back window frame, across the two names on the sign above the door. In the ledger drawer, under the order receipts, the original Chronicle notice was folded along its old creases. Celia had put it there on the morning after the hearing, and had not moved it since. It was not framed. It was the dispensary's document, like all the other dispensary documents, and it belonged in the drawer with the rest of the work. The camphor order was fixed. The column was added. The tea went cold on the bench, because neither of them remembered to drink it. Outside, the morning went on.